I shot him. I shot him 10 times. Texas, a place where law and order are supposed to be upheld, where those who swear to protect and serve stand as a line between chaos and justice. But one night, that line was shattered. A father, a daughter, a gun, and a truth so disturbing it burned along with the evidence. The officers who arrived at the crime scene were no strangers to violence. They had seen blood before. They had heard gunshots echo through the night. But this was something else. 10 bullets, a lifeless body, the charred remains of a crime so personal, so calculated, that even the most hardened investigators hesitated before stepping forward. At the center of it all stood a woman, one of their own, a police officer, her hands steady, her voice controlled, her words chilling in their simplicity. I had no choice. But what led to this moment? What did she see that made her pull the trigger? Again and again? And why, when the shooting was over, when the body lay still, did she take the next step, the one that would forever erase the man who had haunted her nightmares? This wasn't just a crime. It was something else. Something is hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary Texas home. And when the truth finally came out, it left an entire community asking one question. Did she act out of justice? Or was there something much, much worse at play? Texas, a land of sprawling highways, small-town secrets, and an unshakable belief in justice. It is a place where law and order are more than just words. They are a way of life. But on one particular night, justice didn't come from a courtroom. It didn't come from a judge, a jury, or a badge. It came from the barrel of a gun. A veteran police officer, a well-known father, a family that should have been protected. And yet, by the time the first responders arrived, the crime was already over. What they found was not an open case. It was a question that would haunt Texas law enforcement for years to come. 10 bullets, a backyard engulfed in flames, a charred, unrecognizable figure left, smoldering in the shadows. At first, the story seemed clear, until investigators realized who the shooter was. And then, everything changed. Texas authorities were called just after midnight, when neighbors spotted thick black smoke rising into the sky. They assumed it was a house fire, maybe a backyard accident. But when the firefighters arrived, they weren't met with burning wood or a collapsing home. They were met with something far worse. We have a possible 1045. I repeat, we have a body. Multiple gunshot wounds. Scene is still active. A body, not just burned, but riddled with bullets. And in the middle of it all stood the person responsible. A Texas police officer, her service weapon still warm, her face unreadable. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she stood waiting, as if daring someone to ask her why. But the real horror wasn't in what was found at the scene. It was in what led up to it. Because the man lying in that fire wasn't just anyone. He was her father. And the reason she pulled that trigger was a secret that had been festering inside that house for far too long. A name that sent shockwaves through Texas law enforcement, a crime so brutal, so personal, that even the most experienced officers struggled to make sense of it. And when investigators peeled back the layers of this case, what they uncovered changed everything. Texas detectives arrived at a crime scene unlike any other. The flames had died down, but the evidence left behind painted a story too brutal to ignore. A father executed, a daughter left in shock, and standing in the middle of it all was the shooter. Not a criminal, not a stranger, but one of their own, a police officer sworn to uphold the law. But on this night, law and order had been replaced with something entirely else. The first question investigators needed to answer was simple. Why? Why would an experienced officer, trained to handle high-stress situations, fire 10 bullets into her own father? And why set his body on fire in the backyard? The answer began inside the house, a house where no one outside the family knew what was happening behind closed doors, a house where a secret had festered, hidden in plain sight. According to investigators, it started with a sound, a noise from the bedroom, a noise that made the officer stop cold in her tracks. And when she opened that door, her world changed forever. Her father, the man who raised her, the man she trusted more than anyone else, and standing there with him was her own daughter. In that instant, training didn't matter. The badge didn't matter. Only one thing mattered: stopping him. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. The gun came up, her duty weapon, standard issue, .40 caliber. The first shot was at close range. The second and third came before he even had a chance to react. By the time she stopped, there were 10 spent shell casings on the floor. Her father lay motionless. Based on the trajectory and spacing of the shots, this wasn't a moment of uncontrolled rage. The pattern suggests precision, each bullet placed with intent. This was not an accident. But if this was justice in her eyes, why try to erase it? Why the fire? Why go to such lengths to destroy the evidence? Because this wasn't just about what she did. It was about what it meant. A Texas police officer, sworn to serve and protect, had become the executioner. And she knew the system. She knew what came next. Neighbors saw the smoke before they heard the sirens, a desperate act to erase the horror. But fire doesn't erase bullets, it doesn't erase blood, and it doesn't erase the truth. When the authorities arrived, she was waiting for them. Not with excuses, not with denials, but with a confession that stunned even the most hardened investigators, because what she said next changed the case entirely. A veteran officer, a trained professional, a mother, and now a killer. But was this an act of justice, or had something inside her fractured beyond repair? What makes a person, someone who has sworn to uphold the law, cross that line? To pull the trigger not once, not twice, but 10 times. To stand there unflinching as a body burns. Was it an act of maternal instinct, a split-second decision driven by a need to protect, or was there something deeper at play? In cases like this, we often see something called dissociative rage. The moment she walked in and saw what was happening, her mind may have completely disconnected from rational thought. But what's troubling is the precision. Each shot was placed with purpose. That suggests something else was operating in tandem with that emotional break. Training, calculation, maybe even something premeditated deep within her subconscious. She never wavered in her confession, never tried to justify her actions with anything other than the truth. But as the details unfolded, one question remained. Was she truly the only victim? For years, this family presented a perfect image, an officer who dedicated her life to justice, a father who was well-liked in the community, a household that seemed ordinary. But the truth is rarely simple, and what happened behind closed doors may have been unraveling long before that night. The trauma inflicted on the daughter, whether before or after the shooting, will shape the rest of her life. She not only witnessed her grandfather's death at the hands of her own mother, she was the catalyst. She will have to carry that weight forever. But here's the legal dilemma. Was this murder, or was it justified? In the state of Texas, self-defense laws are among the strongest in the country. But this wasn't self-defense in the heat of the moment. This was an execution. The court had to decide, was she legally insane? Was she acting in a fit of uncontrollable rage? Or was this something the law couldn't categorize? Her defense team argued for temporary insanity, claiming she was so overcome with the shock of what she witnessed that she acted without full cognitive control. Prosecutors, however, saw something else, something colder, more deliberate. The number of shots, the effort to erase the crime scene, the absolute lack of remorse. Had she simply fired one shot, we'd be talking about a clear-cut case of self-defense. But 10 rounds. The law sees that differently. Texas law allows for justified force, but only to stop an immediate threat. This was something beyond that. This was a punishment. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Texas Police Department's official response. What do you do when one of your own becomes the criminal? This department does not condone unlawful killings, regardless of the circumstances. We serve the law, and in this case, the law will decide her fate. But as the trial loomed, one final revelation would turn this case upside down and redefine everything we thought we knew about justice. Inside the packed courtroom, tension sat thick in the air. A Texas jury faced a question with no easy answer. Was this a crime of passion or something much darker? The prosecution didn't hold back. They argued that this wasn't a moment of blind rage. It was something calculated. 10 rounds fired with precision. A cover-up attempt. The way she calmly confessed. Not begging for mercy, not breaking down in regret, but simply stating the facts. This was not the act of a desperate mother. This was an execution. She did not hesitate. She did not falter. And that is why we are asking for the maximum penalty under Texas law. But the defense painted a different picture. One of a woman who had been pushed to the edge, whose mind snapped in the instant she saw her worst nightmare playing out in front of her. They argued that her police training was the very thing that made her reaction so deadly, that years of tactical conditioning had taken over, turning her into something mechanical, something automatic. This was not premeditation. This was not cold-blooded murder. This was a mother broken in a way that none of us can fully understand, witnessing an unthinkable horror, and in that moment she acted on instinct. The same instinct that made her a decorated officer. And then came the moment that would decide everything. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The verdict, guilty of manslaughter, a decision that shocked both sides of the courtroom. Not murder, not a justifiable act of self-defense, but something in between. The law had spoken, but the questions remained, and then came the final twist. The trial was over, but the investigation wasn't. Because as the dust settled, detectives uncovered something buried deep in the past, something that made this case even more disturbing. We started re-examining the father's past, his movements, his old records. And that's when we found something that changed everything. A child who disappeared years ago, a case that went cold, and a connection that no one had seen. Until now. Her father had been under suspicion once before, but the case was closed. No evidence, no body, nothing to prove what had happened to that child. Until now. What we now know is that the fire didn't just destroy his body. It destroyed evidence. And we'll never know how much more was hidden there, erased before we could uncover the truth. Was this a mother finally seeing the truth that had haunted her for years? Did she always suspect her father was capable of something monstrous? And if she did, was that why she pulled the trigger 10 times? Justice was served, but whose justice and at what cost? Justice or murder, a mother's instinct, or something far more chilling? What would you have done in her shoes? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Your thoughts matter. Was this justified or was it an execution? Let's keep the conversation going. If this story kept you on edge, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We bring you the darkest cases from Texas and beyond. Real crime, real stories, and the truth that will keep you up at night. This case is closed, but the discussion is just beginning. See you in the next case.